All right, well, what we're going to do over the course of the next, for the next several hours, I would suggest, is go through what exactly the preliminary report says. And I'm going to start off right away by saying, as part of the data which has been downloaded, the aircraft crossed the takeoff decision speed V1 at a speed of 153 knots. Let me explain that. This is the aircraft shortly after it took off. It took off successfully at a speed of 153 knots. Let's bring out that video at a later stage showing the entire takeoff run so that I can describe what was happening. The aircraft transitioned from the ground to the air, consistent with the liftoff. It achieved the maximum recorded airspeed of 180 knots, but then it started descending. I'm going to explain to you what the report says about that. But just a few moments after takeoff, right? The aircraft air-ground sensors transitioned to air mode at 8:08:39 UTC, and 3 seconds later, there was an indicator that engine 1 and engine 2, remember there are only 2 engines on the Dreamliner, their fuel cutoff switches had transitioned from the run to the cutoff position, right, with a gap of 1 second. That's bizarre, right? The engine number 1 and engine number 2 began to decrease from their takeoff values as the fuel supply to the engines was cut off. In the cockpit voice recording, one of the pilots is heard asking the other, why did he cut off? And the other pilot responded that he did not do so. What happened after that? As shortly thereafter, there was an attempt by the pilots to restart the engines. Remember, the fuel control switches had been moved off. Why they were moved off, we do not know. But then the aircraft is still flying, but it's losing speed, obviously. Engine number 1, fuel cutoff switch transitioned from the cutoff to the run switch. Or somewhere at this stage, the pilots restarted the fuel flow into the engines, and there was an attempt at relighting the engines, in other words, restarting the engines. And what is absolutely clear is that one of the engines did restart. And we do need to actually explain this over and over again. So this is that takeoff run. The aircraft achieves a speed of 153 knots right there. It climbs into the air momentarily after climbing off. Within a period of approximately 1 second, the fuel switches to both the engines are cut off, right? They are moved from the on position to the off position. At that stage, that is the last thing that you want. Let's go back to that video, because as soon as, let's go back to the video of the aircraft as it flies away, right? We're going to stay with this for a moment. The aircraft takeoff performance is normal. It moves to 153 knots is the speed. Shortly thereafter, it takes off. Keep going with the video, don't freeze it. And at this stage, it's climbing normally, but it's right over here, likely, that the fuel switches have been put into the off position. No one knows what is happening. It is losing its ability to climb. At this stage, one of the pilots asks the other, did you do that? He says, no, I did. It wasn't me, right? In the cockpit voice recording, freeze that over here for a second. In the cockpit voice recording, one of the pilots is heard asking the other, why did he cut off, right? In other words, cut off fuel flow. The other pilot responded that he did not do so. At this stage, there's a device, keep going with the video, called the ram air turbine. It's a small propeller that deploys in an effort to give electrical power to the aircraft. Remember, there was no electrical power, essentially, if both the engines went off. At this stage, both the engines did go off, but just within that 30-odd seconds of that plane being in the air, there was an attempt, and a successful one, to relight the engines. Right? There was a successful attempt to relight the engines, but there was just not enough altitude for the aircraft to power away. Let's move to the next image that we have. Right? This is the position of the fuel switches. The debris shows, freeze the image over here, the debris shows the fuel switches in the on position. But this was done subsequently. As I was describing to you, just as the aircraft took off, the fuel switches were put in the cutoff position. And I'll describe it over here. This is what a normal throttle quadrant looks like. These are the fuel switches in the Boeing 787. These are not normal switches that you go from on to off. The on position is on top. The off position is below. As a safety measure, there are two sets of safeties. Firstly, as you can see, it's guarded over here. There is a guardrail on one side. Zoom in. There's this guardrail on this one side, and there is this guardrail over here on the other side. This is to ensure that accidentally the hand of a pilot doesn't come over here, because these are critical systems, as we know. Secondly, you don't just move these from the on to the off position. To do that, you have to physically lift it out like this, push it down, and then let go, and it's stuck over there, right? It moves into that position, it's locked into that position. If you were to try and push it up like that, it won't move. The only way is if you have a deliberate motion of pulling it out and then moving it like that, and then it's spring-loaded, it falls into place, and it's locked in that position. So in a period of 1 second, if this report is correct, shortly after taking off, both these switches went from the on to the off position. One of the pilots asks the other, "Did you do that?" That pilot says, "No, I didn't." They then take the switches and push them back up, right? One of the engines restarts. It is beginning to spool up, but there was simply not enough altitude. The plane crashes. 260 people, including people on the ground, have lost their lives. Let's move to the next, which is why right over here, it's in the on position, right? This is the debris. The final position, when they recovered this, shows it's on. So this happened afterwards. Somebody had switched it off, or it perhaps switched off by itself. We do not know, but as I've described to you, that seems, it seems unlikely. It's not designed to do that, right? But in the final position, it's been found locked in position in the on position. By then, it was too late. Let's move to the next image of the flight data recorder, because this is a part of the black box. The black box is it's an easy term to remember, but it is composed of two units: the digital flight data recorder and the cockpit voice recorder. There are two sets of black boxes. There is a black box unit composed of both these items I described in the front of the aircraft and the back of the aircraft. This, I believe, is the digital flight data recorder. And let's freeze the image here for a second. One was found in the front of the aircraft, one was found behind the aircraft, where it was meant to be, but very badly damaged. In both cases, you can see that these have been extremely badly damaged. And there was, we now learn, a delay of several days before equipment. I won't use the word delay, but there was a time period of several days before a specialized chassis and cables and equipment were flown in by the NTSB, which is the American National Transport Safety Board, very much the world leaders in flight and investigations, this sort of investigation. They brought in their equipment on the basis of which this was opened, and the memory chip inside, which recorded dozens of hours of equipment of information on this aircraft through all its sensors and all its systems, right? That memory card was removed and the data was successfully accessed. And the report that we are now looking at is on the basis of that data which was downloaded. Let's go to the next image. And the next one actually looks at the flap handle lever. Again, this is important because if we can for a moment roll that footage. No, let's go back to the previous one. Let's go back, please, to the previous one. Stay over here. And as we stay over here, if I can just ask my director to play out the video of the aircraft, because I need to explain something over here. In the takeoff run, there was a great deal of many questions raised in the early period about whether the wings, which have their flaps, whether the flaps on the wings, which are a part of the structure which actually enables the aircraft to fly, whether it was in the correct configuration. There's something called a takeoff configuration for flaps, a landing configuration. There are multiple configurations. And on the basis of video, both from this end and from the other end, there was speculation that the pilots had improperly configured their flaps, which is why the aircraft couldn't take off and fly away quite the way it should, because the flaps are designed to generate lift. But let's just show you this image of the flap handle lever. This shows that the flaps are in the flaps 5 position. In other words, it is consistent and properly configured. So that theory has been dismissed by the preliminary report. And finally, the image which we can show you is of the landing gear. Again, there was a query about where the landing gear was. Let's move to the next image. The landing gear was in the deployed position as it, in that it was extended. It hadn't been retracted. There's nothing unusual over there. The pilots perhaps didn't have time to raise the undercarriage. They had this stage realized that the fuel flow to the engines wasn't taking place, which is a far larger concern. Let's go straight across to NDTV's Aishwarya, who's been tracking many details of this. Aishwarya, go ahead.
Well, as we are bringing out these crucial details which have come out in the preliminary report, I've been speaking to multiple families who have lost their loved ones. And as Air India has lost one aircraft, but the real loss is for the family members who have lost their loved ones. Perhaps I've been speaking to them. They are in real grief. And I tried to ask them about the initial reaction of what they think about the switches or the initial details, the position of flaps and all. They said that we don't want to get into the details. The real loss is, of course, of what we have lost our loved ones. They will not come back. Perhaps they only want that, in the near future, such incidents do not happen. Ramesh Vishwas Kumar, one of the lone survivors who's still in view, he hasn't, come out of his residence for last 1 month. And yesterday I inquired about him. The family members told that he's still in such a grief because he lost his brother who was traveling along with him. And just for the medical purposes, he comes out of his residence and he's not able to speak after 1 month as well. So as these details are coming out, we are getting to know about how the plane crashed, what has happened, what pilot and co-pilot had the conversation. Whether it is to be blamed to the pilot, we don't know at this point in time. But yes, the family members of those victims really wants justice, as they had stated to us that in the near future they don't want such an incident to happen, and we should learn from such accidents.
Right, Aishwarya, stay on with us. Let me bring in my colleague Tanushka, also joining us with more details. Tanushka, if you could also take us through the statements made by Air India as well as Boeing immediately after the preliminary report had come out. Of course, it came out at around 1 a.m. Early this morning, and we had seen that after the report had come out, both of them said they were going to support the investigation. Take us through exactly what they said.
Right, Aarti, right after the preliminary report has come out as a response to the same, Air India and Boeing have also issued their own statements. Both resonate the similar sentiments with respect to offering their condolences to the families of those who have lost their loved ones in this tragic crash. And Air India has said that they have been contributing to the investigation and will continue to do so, and working in tandem with the AAIB in whatever capacity that is needed and required. Meanwhile, Boeing in its statement has also said, Boeing CEO has written out a statement, Kelly Ortberg, in which she mentioned that they will defer to the AAIB and they will also extend any sort of support that is required in the investigation. Now, remember, until now, in the report, no recommended actions have been issued to Boeing 787 or GE Gen X engine operators either. Remember, this is just the preliminary report. The final report may bring about some changes to that. So this is what, at this point, Air India and Boeing stand at with respect to the prelim report by AAIB.
Straight across to Captain Amit Singh. We're also joined by aviation safety expert Kishore Chinta and Captain Rakesh Rai. We'll stay with them for a little while, go across to all of them. Captain Amit Singh, let me come to you first. Why would, or is there any conceivable way in which the fuel cutoffs, so the fuel switches could be moved from the on position to the cutoff position without the manual intervention of the pilots?
The only possibility is the log getting disengaged, which, as per the service information bulletin, which is an advisory by FAA, which was issued in 2018, and this particular aircraft was also affected. So that could be a remote possibility of the log getting disengaged and inadvertently, because of maybe bumps on the runway or vibration, they could have come up. That is a remote possibility. But nevertheless, that has to be ruled out by the investigation. Otherwise, there is no other way that these switches can move unless there is a deliberate pilot action or a human intervention. I don't say pilot, but could be human intervention.
You know, if you look at the debris of the aircraft, the fuel switches are in the on position. So obviously there was an attempt by the pilots, and we know that they were trying to restart the engines. They were partly successful, but you know, they appeared to be staying in the on position in the debris which was found. They appeared to be locked in the on position. So you know, if we are talking about something in the lock mechanism having failed, it's evidently still holding in the on position in the final moments when the aircraft went down. So again,
correct,
we don't know enough at this stage, but we really do need to try and find out, and I'm sure the investigators are, Amit, on whether the lock mechanism has failed or it's not failed, right? Would you say that that's what this all is essentially coming down to?
So yes, as a part of investigation, they have to rule out that it is not a mechanical issue, it is a human factor issue. But if you look at the timeline does not match. As per the timeline, the aircraft got airborne at 08:39 seconds, and the fuel control switches were switched off at 42.
Yes.
So that is about 3 seconds. The aircraft would have gained about 30 to 40 feet.
Yes.
In those 3 seconds.
Yes.
Now, if you can roll your footage and freeze the image at 3 seconds and compare it with the CCTV image which is there in the report, which I don't know why, but there is no timestamp on the CCTV footage. So the aircraft in the CCTV image is about 50 feet.
All right, so it's on the takeoff. No, 1 second. I'll tell you, we'll freeze it, and I'll tell my director when to freeze that footage. Right?
Yeah.
1, 2, 3.
Yeah.
Freeze it there. Freeze the footage over there, approximately there. Amit, go ahead with the point that you're making.
And if you compare it with the image in the preliminary report, the CCTV image.
Right. Okay. We don't have that with us. We'll try and pull that up later.
Okay.
But yeah, what is the point you're making?
The CCTV image, it shows the RAT deployed. So
Yes.
at this position, the RAT is deployed, which means the engines have failed a couple of seconds before this.
Oh, really?
Right. Yeah, because in the CCTV
Yes.
image, the aircraft is at the same height and the RAT is shown as deployed, which means the RAT takes about 2 to 3 seconds.
All right. We've got this image. We've got the image on our screen. And from this angle, it shows the RAT deployed.
Yeah.
You're
So
absolutely
this
right.
is about 50 feet. The 50 feet RAT is deployed, which means the RAT takes 2 to 3 seconds to come out and get deployed. And it takes about maybe 2 seconds for the engines to spool down and for a confirmation of an engine failure for the RAT to trigger. So if you take 5 seconds, this is about 08:42. You go back 5 seconds, which means the engines failed while the aircraft was on ground or just about lifting off. Not so the timelines don't match. Even the CVR, why did you switch off the engines? There is no timestamp on it. When did they say?
And it doesn't
What were they
indicate
doing
who
for
said
10
it.
seconds?
It doesn't indicate who said it, which of the pilots.
Yeah.
And who responded.
Said it and at what time did they say? What was happening in the 10 seconds between the fuel control switches when they were off and to the time when they were switched on? Was there any caution? There would have been an engine shutdown message for the pilots, ICAS. Clearly, the co-pilot was flying. So co-pilot was carrying out the takeoff. So when you have a dual engine failure, the indications, the cockpit indications on the co-pilot side go off. Only the captains remain.
Yeah.
So the co-pilot obviously cannot fly. He has to hand over the controls to the captain now. And captain takes over. So who's communicating at this time? What was going on? The report is silent about it, even though they have the CVR. But those critical key information is not available. The FDR data is not available. Even the Ethiopian report, if you see, that is a 33-page report. This is a mere 15-page report. That one, normally preliminary report is like a final report. The format is similar. So you must, one must present the FDR data so that you can match the timelines and the CVR transcript. Here we have very little data, selective data being presented, and the timelines also don't kind of match. So had they got a few seconds more, they could have basically one engine could have picked up in that time.
No, and we'll talk about that in a moment. What Captain Amit Singh actually refers to is the second part of all of this. In as much as we are focusing on the fuel switches having been cut off, they were restarted as well. One of the engines did relight. It was spooling up, but there wasn't enough altitude for it to actually be able to recover. Captain Kishore Chinta, based on what Amit said, which is a curious point, based on the photograph, and let's have that photo up once again on the screen. It shows that the ram air turbine deployed at no altitude. This is maybe 70, 80, if not less than that, feet. This only deploys if there is a twin engine failure. That means the fuel cutoff actually took place a few seconds earlier, right? But the fact of the matter is that in a critical phase of the flight, there was a fuel cutoff which took place. My question is the same that I asked Amit. Is there any way in which that fuel control lever can move from the on, or levers can move from the on to the off position unless it's done by the pilots themselves?
Vishnu, I agree with what Captain Amit has pointed out. If you see the CCTV footage, which is the screenshot which has been put on the preliminary report, this has not been disclosed earlier. This is a frontal view of the aircraft, barely 50 feet, and the RAT is already deployed. So for the RAT to deploy, the engine should have spooled down to a range where it meets the conditions for the RAT deployment. So obviously it would not happen at 50 feet. We do not know where was the CCTV. In all probability, it would have probably deployed earlier. Like Captain Amit said, we do not have a timestamp on what, where and all. And overall, the AAIB preliminary report has very selective information and paraphrased in a manner to indicate that the pilots would have done it. It is near impossible. Those switches are designed for you to pull and move them physically to the down position. So even if I put my hand over them, unless there's a mechanical breakage, they won't go to the off position. So it's at the critical phase of flight where beyond V1, we are assuming that the co-pilot was flying. He would have had both his hands on the yoke. The captain would not have his hands anywhere close to those switches to even accidentally have switched them off. So, and the wording used over there, the pilots used the word, did you switch them off? At what point who said that? And when did the transition of the controls happen? Like Captain Amit said, from the co-pilot to the captain, all these aspects are very silent in that. So the preliminary report has very selective information, and the words used, transitioned from cutoff to on. It's not a magical switch that it will transition on its own. Yeah. If somebody in the cockpit, let's say the pilots actually moved them from cutoff to on, somebody in the cockpit would have given that call. Okay, put them to on.
Okay, just 1 second. Let me just
released in the preliminary report?
Got it.
Nothing.
Let's bring in Captain Rakesh Rai. Captain Rai, on the basis of what you've seen, I think the aircraft reached a speed of 153 knots. Was that ideally the ideal takeoff speed? I know that it reached a maximum speed of approximately 183 knots, but would 153 knots be a reasonable speed for it to take off?
See, the speeds are calculated in the dispatch and fed into the system in the aircraft. And as per the calculated speed from the flight management computer, that was the speed for takeoff. So it was a perfectly okay speed. And as Captain Amit has rightly brought out, if you look at the timeline as to when the RAT has got deployed, it appears that the engines have failed when the wheels were still on the ground. So right. That means there were weight on wheels.
So there was weight on wheels. The aircraft was still gaining speed down the runway, and potentially on the runway itself is when the fuel switches had been switched off for whatever reason, we don't know. But by then it was possibly too late for the pilot to abort a takeoff.
There is one more aspect of it.
Yes,
there is
yes.
one more aspect of it
Yes.
that is called thrust control malfunction accommodation. It's a kind of a software. Now, there is a software called software 130 in this system, which activates only on the ground. That means the aircraft senses that we are on the ground. And it actually shuts off the fuel system if it notices that the engine has exceeded certain threshold of power. So there is a possibility, no software in the world is foolproof. So there's a possibility that this system has malfunctioned and shut off the fuel to the engines. That is one aspect of it.
But would the switches move as well if that happens?
They will not. They will not.
I'm
just coming from one point to the other. I'm just trying to debate on what all possibilities are there. Now the fuel control switch being cut off, like the bulletin which was issued in 2018, a service bulletin which none of the pilots were aware of, required this particular system to be changed every 11,000 cycles. Now the point is we need to know whether these systems were changed. Now the fuel control switch, to put it in layman's language, it is something like in some of the cars have this system of reverse gear where you have to pull the gear up and then put it in reverse so that inadvertently you don't put it in reverse. It is something like that you have to pull the fuel control switch and put it to run or to cut off. So it has to be a very deliberate attempt to cut off the fuel switch.
All right.
So now if that fuel control switch has malfunctioned as per the bulletin of 2018 and because of some bump on the runway or whatever, it has cut off, that needs to be investigated. Now, other point which I need to highlight is there is very selective reporting. There is only one sentence of the pilot which has been reported, did you switch it off? There must have been a whole lot of conversation going on in the cockpit. Both the pilots must have spoken a lot of words, a lot of sentences. Those we are not aware of. So unless those things are corroborated with whatever has happened, we cannot come to a conclusion exactly what has happened.
All right. Well, we're going to take a short break. Thanks, Captain, very much for making those points. Lots of interesting scenarios. And I think we'll go back to what Captain Amit Singh was actually saying as well in a few moments from now. But we do need to take a short break and come back as we bring you, continue to bring you the chilling last moments of AI 171 based on the preliminary crash report. Good morning. We continue to track the latest information that is available in the preliminary crash report of AI 171. That's the Boeing 787 Dreamliner of Air India, which crashed shortly after taking off from Ahmedabad's airport on a flight to London Gatwick exactly a month back on the 12th of June last month. 260 people in total, including people on the ground, lost their lives. There was one person who miraculously survived. I'm going to go through, once again, for the benefit of our viewers just joining in right now, the sequence of events as established by the preliminary report. The aircraft crossed a takeoff decision speed of 153 knots. The aircraft air-ground sensors transitioned to air mode. In other words, the aircraft detected that it was in the air, and that was consistent with liftoff at a particular time, which is established over there. The aircraft achieved the maximum recorded airspeed of 180 knots immediately thereafter, so essentially moments after taking off. The engine 1 and engine 2 fuel cutoff switches transitioned from the run position to the cutoff position, right? That's what we are showing over there. The image on the left is of the debris of the aircraft, and the image on the right is what it actually looks like. And both of these switches transition from the run to cutoff position within a second of each other. The engine number 1 and number 2 began to decrease from their takeoff values. In other words, the thrust was coming down. The aircraft was losing its ability to climb out as the fuel supply to the engines was cut off. in the cockpit voice recording, one of the pilots is heard asking the other, why did he cut off? In other words, why did the pilot cut off the fuel flow to the engines? The other pilot responds that he did not do so. We do not know which pilot said what. Now, what we do know is that the pilot flying the aircraft on this occasion was the co-pilot of the aircraft, the pilot sitting in the right seat. The commander of the aircraft was sitting on the left seat. He was the pilot monitoring. So typically in a takeoff scenario, the pilot flying would have both his hands on the yoke of the aircraft, or possibly one hand on the lever, on the thrust lever, and one hand off the yoke. But at some stage, one of the pilots switched off or potentially switched off the fuel control switches. We don't know if it was deliberately done by the pilots. What we're trying to understand is whether it was done through a mechanical fault, an electronic fault, or any other reason. And that seems to be difficult given the design of the systems itself. At that stage, what happened was, the flight started losing its ability to climb, but there was also a ram air turbine which was deployed. That's a tiny little propeller which sort of comes out of the fuselage of the aircraft to ensure that there is enough electrical power to maintain the basic functions within the cockpit in terms of the displays, and it ensures that there is enough hydraulic pressure available on the various flying surfaces of the aircraft. It's deployed in a dire emergency. It was deployed over here. Right? Now, here's the interesting bit we need to focus on a little bit more. The pilots did realize, as I mentioned, that the fuel control switch was off. What did they try and do? They tried to put the fuel control switches on. Now, as per the EAFR, which is the digital flight data recorder, the engine number 1 fuel cutoff switch transitioned from cutoff to the run position. Okay, so they did start up the engines. So let's go back to the fuel switches once again, because we're showing something I'll talk about in a little while from now. Let's stay on this. So after being switched off, it did go back on. The APU inlet door began opening consistent with the APU auto start logic. In other words, the auxiliary power unit, which is another system on the aircraft, it's a mini engine in the back of the aircraft that has a different role. It controls, for example, air conditioning when the aircraft is on the ground. It is used to initiate an auto start sort of function. In other words, if the fuel control switches were recycled and put to the on position, as was the case right now, the APU would attempt to trigger a relight of the engines. When fuel control switches are moved from cutoff to run while the aircraft is in flight, each engine's full authority dual engine control automatically manages a relight. This is critical. The engines did come back on after essentially switching off, and a thrust recovery sequence of ignition and fuel introduction that was taking place. The EGT was observed to be rising for both engines, indicating relight. Engine 1's core deceleration stopped, reversed, and started to progress to recovery. Engine 2 was able to relight but could not arrest the core speed deceleration and reintroduced fuel repeatedly to increase the core speed of the engine's acceleration and recovery. That was unsuccessful. The flight data recorder stopped recording, and it gives a particular time. By then, the pilots had transmitted Mayday, Mayday, Mayday. In other words, a critical emergency. Captain Amit Singh, just on the basis of this sequence of events which I have read out and described, do you have any thoughts that you can share with us?
One of the scenarios in which the pilots could deliberately put the fuel control switches off is, again, a dual engine fail. So at takeoff, if there is a dual engine failure, the checklist says fuel control switches both cut off, then run. And ram air turbine switch, push and hold for 1 second. That is a memory item that you're supposed to do. And it is a possibility that...
The problem with that, Amit, is that one of the pilots asks the other one, did you cut off the fuel supply? And he says, no, I didn't do it.
At what stage, we don't know. And so because there is no timestamp on that CVR.
Yeah.
So both the... so if we rule out this one, that because when the takeoff happens, if you see the CCTV footage for the takeoff roll, there's a plume of dust, or it could be smoke also because of an engine failure that we have seen in other videos of. Recently, I saw a video of a 320 takeoff with an engine failure. It has a similar plume of dust. And a lot of people say it could be a wingtip vortex, but this is not emanating from the wingtips. It is coming from the engines from inside. So there has been some kind of a yaw, and the engine thrust has caused this plume of dust that you see. Yeah, that is a possibility.
Okay, one second. Let's bring in Captain Rakesh Rai. Captain Rai, your thoughts on, again, the fuel switches being in the off position. They attempted to relight it. My question is this, just to move the conversation forward. If this aircraft had a little bit more altitude, with one of the engines coming back online and having been relit successfully, they may have been able to fly out. They just didn't have enough altitude to play with, right? That's what resulted in the tragedy.
And that altitude would have to be significantly higher, at least maybe about 1,000 feet or above. They didn't have enough height in hand for the engine to relight and give sufficient thrust. Jet engines take a lot of time to spool up and develop thrust. It's not like a propeller where the thrust comes on nearly instantaneously. So even if the engines had developed power or engines had started, it would take quite some time for the power to come up, for the pilots to...
Okay, Captain Rai, I'm interrupting you just now because we've got a very special guest with us, Tripti Soni, a relative of somebody who very sadly lost their life in this air crash. Tripti, thank you for having the courage to come on board and speak to us today. Who did you lose in this accident?
I lost my younger brother, his wife, and my elder brother's wife. 3 members of my family we lost in this air crash.
Our sincere condolences, and I can't imagine what you are going through. Tripti, if you can just tell us a little bit about your thoughts this morning as you go through this report.
I think it's quite a preliminary report. It establishes nothing more deeper than the 2 facts that plane had crashed because of the loss of thrust, and loss of thrust might have caused by the cut down of an engine. Now the reason why the engine's fuel was cut down and everything is it's a theory which is being built on that. So unless and until this is being proved, that because pilot in this report says that other pilots said that he did not cut it off.
Yeah.
He did not do that. So that has to be given a weightage that there may be some malfunction of it. Not just that it may be some error, which that things this report might have been trying to pointing out at. If it is a fair and free investigation, later stage, I would like that government to put all this DFDR in a public domain for anybody to verify what are the real root cause of this aircraft, and that we are yet to see.
Tripti ji, could you tell us a little bit about your family members who aren't here today?
Yeah. My younger brother was a very brilliant guy, actually. He was leading our business also, and he was a very intelligent, just 46 years of age. And his wife was also, very bright, and elder brother's wife also. They were the main pillars of our family who was running the family. It's been a month and we are still not out of this shock. It's been a great loss to all of us.
And could you tell us a little bit more about them? Tripti, I realize how difficult this is for you. Have you been able to somehow deal with what has happened? I mean, it's
not yet, and I don't know how long it will take to deal with or come to the terms with such kind of things. And it's very heart-wrenching whenever we think of this accident. And I have literally no words to describe it.
Yeah. Is there anything that you can share with us at this stage? Anything that you'd like to say at all?
Yeah, I would like to say that, this investigation should be really fair and free, because there are a lot of, heavyweights are on each side. One side is a Boeing company, one side is Air India, the government. There could be many reasons. and everybody would try to save their skin. So I would really expect, people who are at the helm of this investigation should be, fair and free and transparent manner. They should be conducting this investigation, and in the interest of transparency, whatever data is required by the public has to be put to the public, including the raw DFNDR data and the cockpit voice recorder data.
Yeah. Triptiji, I think that call for transparency is absolutely critical. I'd like to thank you very much for speaking to us. And once again, on behalf of all of us at NDTV, Aarti and me here in the studio, our sincere condolences to you for your incredible loss. I cannot even begin to imagine what you've gone through and what your family has been going through in all of this. I just want to go across to Kishore Chinta, the aviation safety expert, and look at another aspect of this. Let's bring out those pictures of the digital flight data recorder, and just to give our viewers a sense of the damage over there. Now we do know, and it says so in the report, that there was specialized equipment which was flown down by the National Transport Safety Board of America, chassis, cables, etc., and they were only then able to actually open this up and recover the memory card. It appears to be extremely badly damaged, particularly the one on the left, which I think was in the front of the aircraft. Any thoughts on this aspect of the recovery of data? Without this recovery of data, we wouldn't be here speaking about this.
Vishnu, yes, the EAFRs or the flight data recorders are designed to withstand this kind of damage, especially the memory card per se. So the external damage is in sync with an accident of this magnitude. But the cables being burnt, that's all pretty much normal for post-crash impact damage to the flight data recorders. But what is the key point is that we were under the impression that the AAIB was well equipped to have the equipment for downloading the data from even extensively damaged flight data recorder like this. But eventually they do seem to have realized that they didn't have the capability and had to fly down and use the expertise of NTSB to download the data. The data is pretty much intact. They have data for 49 hours. So like Captain Amit brought out, the preliminary report did not bring out all the aspects of the DFDR and the CVR with a timestamp.
Okay. Let me go across to Captain Rakesh Rai as well. Captain, any other thoughts, based on what you've read in the report?
The only thing is there is a very selective reporting of one sentence spoken in the cockpit. And based on that, we cannot come to a conclusion exactly what has happened. And
we don't know which pilot said what, right?
We do not know which pilot said that.
And so we do not know potentially which pilot switched off the fuel switches, if indeed that took place.
And your bulletin is wrongly indicating co-pilot said this and the pilot said this. That's not correct.
We'll have that fixed. Yeah, I noticed that. We'll fix that.
Yeah.
But carry on with your point.
Yeah, so we do not know what has happened based on one sentence being spoken in the cockpit. We cannot come to a conclusion. We need to hear the whole conversation which has taken place in the cockpit. And the DFDR decoded, like, hats off to Tripti ma'am. She was very balanced, and she also is of the opinion that unless we get to know the whole data and we get to know the whole conversation, we cannot come to a conclusion exactly what has happened.
All right. We're also joined by Captain M.R. Wadia, founder president of the Federation of Indian Pilots. Do we have Captain Wadia at this stage? We don't. Okay, so we'll come back to him in a little while from now. Let me go back to Captain Amit Singh. Captain, the other aspect of this is that we do know that the pilots were well rested. They'd arrived in Ahmedabad the day before the crash. We assume they were well rested because fatigue is a huge concern in aviation, particularly on long-haul flights, right?
Fatigue, yes. Fatigue is a big concern globally. So we assume that they were well rested based on the fact that they were given so many hours of rest before the flight. But what was their previous 10 days of roster, that will determine if there was accumulated fatigue. The accumulated fatigue cannot be recovered by the standard 8 hours of rest, 8 hours or 12 hours of rest, which is the minimum required between flights. So that is another aspect which has to be looked at, because at critical stages of flight, ultimately it is the pilots who have to take a decision. To give a comparison, if a pilot has been awake, or any person has been awake for 17 hours, his cognition level or decision-making capability is equivalent to a person with a blood alcohol level of 0.05%. So that is the effect of fatigue on a person. So it is not alcohol that we are looking at, it is ultimately the effect of alcohol. So fatigue causes similar effects, but we are okay with fatigue and not okay with alcohol. So they have to be treated at par. So we have to look at their past 10 days schedule and how much rest have they been given between flights. If it is bare minimum, then of course what people don't realize is that pilots have a social life. They have to go out in the society, work out, keep themselves fit. So that also takes time. But the pilots' roster are squeezed such that they are basically checking out from a flight, 12 hours, they're back. So that is not the kind of environment in which a pilot can remain healthy for a long time. So that is why we have seen increasing number of temporary unfit pilots, permanently unfit pilots, succumbing to heart and brain strokes. This is a World Health Organization and ILO report which says that in 2016, 745,000 deaths have happened because of people working more than 55 hours a week. Pilots work 60 hours a week. And NASA has been saying from 2016 that the max flight duty period should be 10 hours. Pilots are doing 13 hours, 16 hours. So what is the scientific basis of the flight duty time limitation? It is not scientifically based, and there is no risk assessment carried out either by the operator or the regulator. So that is the downside of fatigue that we have to deal with.
All right. Well, gentlemen, I'd like to thank you all very much for being with us.